Here we have a 1984 Jaguar XJS wiper motor assembly with the windshield wiper still attached to it. These things have got quite an issue when they get wet on the inside where the motor gets all gummed up and rusted and then stops working. And I'm sure if you're looking at this video, you've got the same type of an issue. And they are rebuildable. There's a lot of places online that still sell some parts. That's pretty amazing. And their main problem is with these things is there is supposed to be a plastic shield that goes above this motor right here. And if that shield is missing, water will get down in this whole assembly here in the gear drive, get into your park switch here. It'll seep down in the wires going into the motor itself. They go right down in there. I don't know if you can see. But once the water gets inside here, it can't really go anywhere, so it just rusts out the inside of this, gets the armature all nasty, the commutator. Sometimes the magnets come loose. That's what happened on this unit. And I've actually already fixed this unit, but I'm going to show what to do. I should have done a video before I actually repaired the inside, but I'm going to go ahead and pop it back apart because I do need to put the plastic shield in here still anyway. But when I take this apart, you can see on the inside that these things are actually rebuildable if it's not gotten too bad. And even if you pull it apart and the magnets have come off the inside, don't worry. Mine were too. You can reglue them. You can clean out the inside of the thing, reglue the magnets back on. And I'll show you what I've done on the inside of this one to get it back working. And just give me a second here. I'll put the camera up to where I can. There we go. Hopefully you can still see what I'm looking at here. I'm just going to take the two bolts out of the end of the motor here. Now, what I would do before you take your motor apart is just take a marker or something and scratch or mark a place. There's actually a little arrow here, and so what I did on mine is I just scratched a line right below that arrow, just so that you keep this lined up with the base here. Usually these screws will be really rusted. Once the water gets inside the base of the motor, there's really nowhere for it to go. It can sometimes drain out of the side, but a lot of times it'll just sit in there and just turn the thing to a big rusty mess. Now this back side, you can just pull it off. Now the most critical part about this is when you go to grease this, and I've already greased this one, you can see. Let me get something to, I'll just use this little screwdriver here to point, and it's still got grease on it. The bearing here, you need to put some grease on the inside, but not so much that it's just going to blow out and go all over the place. It is also very critical to get grease on the outside edge of this, and I'll show you what I mean when I get the other piece out. There's also a little piece on the back of the motor here. You want to make sure that that doesn't get lost. That's the back side of the bearing, and I'll show you here. I just pulled it right off with my screwdriver, and make sure that it gets back down in there, and there's a little point that sticks through the back. Just make sure that doesn't get lost. Now the easiest way to get this thing off, if it's damaged or not, is to, without really messing up the brushes also, is to hold the windings on the inside of the armature and then just pull the whole piece forward like this. That way you're not just jerking the thing straight out. I'll show you. That's where I've scored the mark on this one. Now what I've done, and it still looks a little messy, but it's actually fine. The whole inside of this thing was rusted really bad. And this magnet here was completely broken off, and it was stuck to the armature. And that's a lot of times what you'll see on these things. Either that or they just won't work at all. And all you have to do is just align those magnets back up, well, first you want to go ahead and clean the inside of this off real good. And I have used some paint that will prevent rust. It's actually a rust reformer. Rust-Oleum, this stuff is really good. It will convert the rust to black paint. And I've used this on various other parts of the car. Not this particular car, but other cars, and it works really, really well. Once you get this all cleaned out, just take the magnets, stick them back in the area where they go, and a lot of times you can tell where they were supposed to be because there'll be some leftover epoxy or whatever there. This is just where the epoxy that I used to glue this back together, some of the black paint has come off of that, but that's fine. Once I glued it back in, you can use JB Weld, something like that would be fine. And then you can just use a clamp like this to go in and just clamp the magnet down until it cures up. That usually works really well. Once that is done, I actually went back over and used that black paint and just hit all the spots that used to have rust on them. That way it'll prevent rust from getting back in there. And we're also going to put that plastic shield back in there, which is really going to help with that. Now let me show you about, let me see if I can zoom in here a little bit. Sorry for hitting the camera. This armature here, it just pulls straight out. And you will see the worm gear here. And the commutator here, you want to make sure, well, I wasn't even focused, was I? Here we go. The gear here, you want to make sure that this is greased nice. This commutator here, you want to make sure that it's nice and clean. You don't want to sand it or anything like that because that's going to make the brushes wear out prematurely if they're not already worn out. If they are, that's also not a big deal because these parts still are available from some sellers, and I'll put a link in the description to that. Just make sure that it's clean in between here. There's no carbon in between these little lines on the commutator. And this plate that's got the brushes in it, my brushes are actually in pretty good shape, so I'm just going to leave those. I do have another set of brushes in case these do wear out, and that way they're very easy to replace. There's just a screw here, here, and here, little Phillips screws. You pull those screws out and this whole plate just pops out, and there's just 3 wires, and they hook up right here. Well, I will zoom out a little bit so that these wires right here are the ones that go to that plate. Now I can zoom back in. Yeah, this plate right here, just when you unbolt it, those wires just pull right through. Not a big deal. I'm just going to leave mine alone because they are okay. Now I've already lubed the inside of this. Another thing you can do, which I was talking about before, these bearings in the back side of here, they need to pivot. And if they don't, when you go to put your motor together, it'll bind up, and then you'll think, oh, the motor doesn't work. It might run very slow, get really hot. That's because these pieces right here have to pivot inside, and I'll show you what I mean. See how you can take this, you put it down, and you can actually move it in a circle like that. See, look at that. That thing has to pivot. If it doesn't, it'll bind up. The reason it pivots is so that it can self-align the armature once you start putting the case back together. There's also one right beyond the brushes. There's the same type of bearing in there, and you also need to lube it the same way. If you don't, again, you'll have issues where it binds up. And there's really not too much to this. Just carefully slide it back in. And, you know, if you're putting this back together for yourself, be sure to lube that that bearing with some good grease. I use some grease that's good for motors. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to hold the brushes. This is the tricky part, because you need to hold these brushes back. Okay, I'm holding the bottom two. Now I'm going to hold that one up and then just slide it right into place. Once we got that back in, now you don't want to just jam this back on there, because what's going to happen is if you do, the magnets are going to pull the armature and just suck it right back out of the motor. So you don't want to do that. So I'm going to find my mark that I made right there, and it actually goes down here. There is that mark. I'm going to line it up with the mark that I've made over here on that right side. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to put it together like this. I'm going to hold the back side. The magnets are going to try to pull, and I'm going to take my fingers and hold the back side of the armature. That way it doesn't pull the whole thing back out. Okay, we've got that on. And so then we're going to take the back piece here, pop it back on, and that's fine. We're going to put the screws back in. I'm going to make sure that my alignment is good. And these screws, you can kind of put them in by hand and feel where they go. They should screw right in. Once you get them in a few turns, it's good to go ahead and take a nut driver and just tighten these things down. Now, you don't go crazy on this. There's no need to make these things incredibly tight. Just want to snug it down just a little bit, like that, and that's all you have to do. I'm going to go ahead and take these bolts out right here. Let me zoom back out. There we go. See if I can get that in picture better. Yep, I'm going to go ahead and take these screws out right here, bolts, and pull this assembly back, and then that way I can put the new plastic shield that goes on top of this motor. Now, I got this from a company called Moss Motors, and I'm sure if you guys are looking at this video, you know who Moss Motors is. They've got all kind of parts for these old Jaguars, and I've been ordering from them for years, and they've always had what I need and get it to me, and have no problem at all. This is a reproduction part for these things, and I will put a link in the description to the part number, and I will also get the part number and description for the brushes also. But right now I'm just going to go ahead and take these out here. Okay, we're going to go ahead and take these wiper arms off. The way they come off, this cap just pulls up and then pops out like that. These are still available also from Moss Motors. So if you have any that are broken or look nasty, that's easily replaced. Just take out that nut and then they pop right out. There's a little rubber bushing that just pops off of that too. And there's a big nut that goes on the back side of these. Mine are actually loose, so I'm just going to pop them out. Now this cap here is actually already broken. I had glued that on a while back with some silicone, so I'm going to replace that. Now these wiper arms, they can go on in many different positions on here. the way they're designed, they have little tiny ribs up inside the hole there, so they can go on just about any position. The easiest thing to do is, once you put this assembly back in the car, just park the windshield wipers, or let the motor park, and once that happens, you can just put the arms on the windshield at the bottom edge, and then that way they won't be up in your face. As you can see, both of these were pretty loose. There's a washer under both of these. I'm just gonna lift this whole assembly up like that. I'm just going to flip it over. As you can see, this cover actually covers over the whole thing, including this arm here. So what we're going to do, there's a couple screws on the back side of this, or bolts I should say. Don't worry if these things turn. There's actually a round cable inside these, and it's just held in by this bottom plate, and it's kind of keyed in with this little hole here. So these things can turn on you, and it's not going to hurt anything at all. I've read a lot of people online having issues with the wiper motors on these cars, but honestly, they're not all that bad. Just this whole assembly can come apart. I took that apart years ago and greased all inside, so it's actually good. This motor is the biggest issue, and as long as this cover stays intact, this is what's going to solve most of your problems right there. And see, that's how it goes on, just like that. And when it sits in the car, this is going to sit just like this, so if the rain falls onto it, it just goes around it. That's what that does. It just keeps the motor itself from getting wet, and the park switch there. Like I said, all the cars now that are still out there, this piece is long gone. It's deteriorated, fell apart, and that is where all of your problems come from. You don't want to over tighten any of these parts. And that should be it. I will go ahead and put this back in the car, and we'll do a demo of it working. Okay, what I'm going to do here is, before I put this back in the car, I'm going to show you how you can test the motor. I should have done this before I bolted everything back up and put the cover on. But once you put your motor assembly back together, and before you put your cover and everything back onto it, you can check the motor out of the car just using a jump box or a 12-volt battery or power supply, just to make sure everything's working right. And what you're going to do is, on this connector right here, with it facing this direction, with this cord coming out like this first pin on the bottom, let me see if I can zoom in, so I'm going to help you out here. Yep, there we go. Much better. Sorry about the camera work. This is going to be your negative, this first pin right here. And then you're going to have low speed, and then high speed is the next one up. So right now we're just going to test the low speed. And as you can see, it's turning back and forth, working good. I don't know if you can hear the motor, but it's definitely low. So we're going to take that out. We're going to put it on high speed. And see there, we got high speed. And the motor sounds good. It's not binding up or making any kind of straining noises or anything. Okay, I just accidentally pulled my lead out of the battery there. But you get the idea. And that'll be a lot easier to double check the motor without having to put it all back in the car, if you're repairing one of these things. That way, if you do have some kind of a problem, you can check it right there and see, without having to take it all back out of the car. And you definitely want to do that before you put the cover on. Alright, I've got the windshield wipers reinstalled, and just going to show you what they look like. That's going to be your low speed there. Put a little water on the windshield so and that's high speed. We'll go back the other way, and that's going to be our intermittent. You can still hit the washer. And we'll go ahead and turn them off. And that's about it for this video. If you have any questions, just leave a comment. Like and subscribe. Probably have a lot of different videos, not necessarily pertaining to vehicles, but have some electronics repair videos, that type of thing. But if you have any more questions about the car, just feel free to ask. And I may put some other videos up of things I've done to this car since I've had it. Well, that's all for now. Thanks for watching.